Today we're talking about Saw X or Saw 10. It is out now, available to buy and rent for Halloween. But saying that though, Halloween is kind of been and gone, although it's Halloween as we're recording this. This will not be edited in time. My name is Phil, we are Boys on Film, and look, it's Matt who's joining us from the US. Matt, are you a fan of the Saw films? I've got to admit, hands up, I own up, I haven't seen all of them. I think I've seen the first 2 or 3, and then I just stopped watching them because I got a bit bored of the franchise, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same, in the exact same boat. I've seen the first 2 for sure, maybe 3, maybe it's the third one. And I actually liked the first 2 a lot, but for some reason I just kind of dropped off and never went back to watching them.
Yeah, me too.
And I think the quality, from what I've read, the quality of them goes up and down. Like some are fine, some are great, some are bad. So it's just kind of like, if you're an aficionado, it's kind of, I think it's like a mixed bag of what's good and what's bad.
I guess that's the same for most horror franchises, isn't it? You've got some really good ones and not so solid ones. But I mean, this... I agree with you. I think the first one was really clever, and it was a bit of a game changer in terms of horror because it was really eye-opening, and it was, it was quite refreshing. It did something a little bit different. But I think the sequels that followed just relied on the actual games themselves, which obviously were torture porn pretty much. And I think torture porn, unless you've got a decent story and decent acting, it just feels a bit shallow to me.
I agree. Yeah, it's kind of like you said, the first one was so novel, and the first one's also not really like the other ones that come after.
Yeah.
I feel like from 2 onwards, that's when they start to have their organization, and they kind of just keep repeating that structure of like kidnapping people and then making them do some kind of torture device. But in the first one, it's a lot more novel about it's more simple and more novel because it was new. But when you're seeing the structure for the 7th time, 8th time, 9th time, it's kind of like, yeah, I've seen this before. Like,
exactly, it's a bit tiresome, isn't it?
There are new people in every one, but the setup is the same, right? It's the Jigsaw man trying to teach these people a lesson, quote unquote, by killing them, or like maybe killing them, maybe letting them escape.
So for those people who don't know much about Saw, essentially, in a couple of sentences, it's about John Kramer, aka Jigsaw.
He somehow encounters people in his daily life and observes them doing some kind of horrendous thing to another person, and he somehow tracks the person so he can follow this perpetrator of these crimes, apparently, and kidnaps them, drugs them so they pass out, wake up, and they're in some kind of contraption that will kill them if they don't escape. And he tells them how to escape, but he gives them a short period of time, like minutes usually, to do some kind of violent act in order to save themselves. And it usually involves mutilating themselves somehow, cutting themselves somehow, or damaging their body.
But this kind of film, I mean, was very popular, still is to a certain extent, but I think it was really a mark of, like, from year 2000 onwards, wasn't it? Around about the time when Hostel was quite big as well. So a lot of these torture porn horror films were very successful. I mean, they made a lot of money, but very popular as well. I mean, I can name Hostel and Saw. I mean, I'm sure there are many, many others that were very similar.
Yeah, they're more, they may not be as much as like a traditional, I'm in a warehouse room being strapped to a chair and tortured, but stuff like Wolf Creek or something where it's a different scenario, but someone gets captured and then the villain tortures them somehow.
So I'm, like we said at the beginning, I've not always been a fan, so I'm probably not the best person to do a review of this, of Saw X or Saw 10. What are we calling it? Saw X?
I think it's 10 because I think it's the 10th film.
Yeah.
But I think people just call it Saw X.
John Kramer, played by Tobin Bell, he's back. This, I think, follows on from the first film, doesn't it? It's the sequel, like disregarding all of the sequels chronologically, I suppose, much like Halloween did recently.
I mean, partially, but I think like his assistant character, the woman, I forgot her name, Amanda, I think is the character's name.
Yeah.
She's in the second one, and I think she's in multiple ones after that. So I don't think it's like Halloween where they disregard everything that came before except for the first one. I think they maybe disregard some of them.
He's sick, isn't he? Because he's got terminal cancer, so he's travelling to Mexico in the hope of being cured of cancer, and he goes to these meetings and meets these other people who have, been cured. He discovers an operation which is bogus, and it's scams to defraud the vulnerable people. The whole motive of kind of teaching people a lesson by essentially making them injure themselves to such an extent that they end up killing themselves is a bit weird. And this film, I thought at the end, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it just put across a really strange message for me. It was almost like they were treating him, John Kramer, like some kind of hero.
Yeah, he's kind of like an anti-hero in this whole series, right? You could say he was like Freddy Krueger or Jason, where he just murders people indiscriminately, but he's given this kind of a philosophy or kind of way of life where he thinks he's doing good by ridding the world of evil people. So it's kind of like, if you agree with him, then I guess he's a hero. But if you think just making people kill themselves is not heroic, then he's not going to be a hero. He's going to be a villain. Right?
I just find that so bizarre, that whole concept, and the games that these people have to play, in order to survive or try to survive. I find it really strange. Like, I guess to a certain point it's entertaining because it's kind of roller coaster horror, isn't it? It's like, oh my God, this is really shocking. Extreme violence. I have to say a couple of these games, a couple not so much so, but some more than others. Some games are like, wow, okay, that is pretty gross. Especially with the woman with the legs, not saying any more than that, but that's pretty gross.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the exciting things of watching the Saw movies. It's like watching the Final Destination movies. It's like a mousetrap setup of how something happens.
See, I prefer that. I think the Final Destination movies, although they're a lot tamer in terms of explicit violence, I think I'm much more enjoy that because that feels like, I don't know, more fun than this. This is quite pretty gross out horror, which I've seen a lot of. I'm not saying I'm alien to it, and I don't want to see all that stuff, but I prefer to see, even though I do like my horror pretty shocking, but not necessarily like violent with it.
Something about the Saw films that a viewer has to kind of have the suspension of disbelief is that this main character, John Jigsaw character, especially in this one, he travels to a different country by himself. He's old. He's relatively frail because he's sick. He gets his operation. For some reason, he doesn't just leave and go back home. He stays in Mexico for an indefinite period of time, has unlimited resources, which is the joke of all the Saw films, is that this guy's like a multi-millionaire who can afford to buy a million different contraptions, put them together himself, even though he's 75 and has cancer, can like do these elaborate machine construction things in a record amount of time, apparently. And this goes on in every Saw film. So it's almost like dark humor where it's like, this is so unrealistic. They don't even talk about the whole, it just goes right into the story. And you're just supposed to believe that that's going to happen.
Are we meant to laugh at that, though? Are we meant to? Is that the kind of in-joke? Is that it's so ridiculous you kind of fall for it?
I think Saw is also kind of like a dark, very dark comedy. Or I think there's supposed to be dark comedy in it, that it's so over the top that it's this weird version of camp where it's like dark horror camp, where it's just like, it's not serious horror, like scary, like Speak No Evil. Do you remember that Dutch film?
Oh yeah, that's really disturbing. Yeah,
that's really disturbing and scary, but not funny and not campy. It's just disturbing. This is like camp. I feel like there's some jokes in it too, maybe.
For the fans, maybe in jokes.
Yeah, not like not like a knock knock joke or something.
No,
but
exactly. Yeah, this is directed by Kevin Greutert, who I think has a history of working on a lot of Saw films. I think he was one of the consultants for Barbarian recently as well, and I think he's done a lot of editing work. I think he edited this film as well as directed it. So I think he's, pretty much hands-on with all these Saw films. I think he's like the common thread, isn't he, for the franchise?
Yeah, it sounds like the Saw films, even if you don't like them, they're really well made, and the production design is pretty slick.
Did you think the effects were good on this? I thought some of the effects were a bit hammy on this. I mean, the radiation scene that I was talking about, I thought that was pretty awful, actually, to look at. I thought the effects were pretty second rate.
I feel like the effects are relatively decent. Like, I don't think they have a huge budget ever. I think they're pretty small.
After all this time,
films.
Have they not made the money? Have they not made the money though with the franchise? I'm sure it's made.
They have,
so
but
much money.
They never put like massive amounts of money into the next film.
Oh,
they
right.
always cap it at a certain level. I don't think any of their films have ever been cost more than like $20 million, which for like a Hollywood film is not very much money. But they make like $100 million, but they only cost 20, so they're making a bunch of money for a certain amount of people.
Well, this to me is, like some other franchise, horror franchises, I guess they make the money, and to me that's what makes it shallow, is that it just feels like it's a money-making exercise. It doesn't necessarily feel that clever.
When you're in a series that gets to a level of like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's clearly just a money-making exercise. It's not like, oh no, this one story, this is the best story of them all. Like, you don't need 10 films to get to the best version of the film. Do you know what I mean? I
mean, I thought the performances were okay. I mean, not with everybody, but I mean, we've got Tobin Bell, like I say, who's obviously, part of some of the other movies. He's like the familiar face, isn't he, of course? Shawnee Smith, also Stephen Brand, Michael Beach, and Renata Vaca. So, yeah, I think some of the performances were okay. I did actually quite enjoy watching it, the first part. Then as soon as the death started happening, I was like, okay, well, I've seen this kind of thing before. It didn't necessarily gross me out too much. Some of it did gross me out a little bit, but I think I'm so hardened by a lot of horror films that it's water off a duck's back, really, sometimes. But I think a lot of people would find this offensive. They would be quite shocked by the gratuitous violence in this. If you're not a fan.
If you're not used to a Saw film, then it's probably really disturbing.
Yeah.
But if you've seen even one of their films, or maybe two, you know the setup, and you know what the disturbing kills are going to be like, and
you know what to expect.
Yeah, and it's the funny thing is that this movie was not scary to me at all. Like, it's not like, I don't know why that is. It's not a scary movie. It's just more of like a gross movie.
I know what you mean. Like, you don't feel necessarily terrified by John Kramer, even though he's doing these awful things. I mean, at one point, I suppose 3/4 of the way in, you don't kind of feel sorry for him. I never felt sorry for him, but I felt like he wasn't a threat so much. And I guess that's because there is a part of the story where he has to do something himself. Not saying anything, but yeah, that was quite interesting. But I don't know. I don't know if it was too late by that point. To be honest, I was past caring.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like you said before, the first, say, third of the movie where there's it's a straight up kind of drama about his life. I thought was really interesting because I feel like they never put that in any other Saw film. It's not that much of his personal struggle and like his life story, kind of. It usually goes straight into the kills like relatively quickly. And this had a very long setup of his kind of rehabilitation. Like, you're led to believe that he'll be cured of this illness, and then he will not find a need to kill people anymore.
I suppose it showed his vulnerable side, if he does have a vulnerable side. But at the end, though, I just did think the movie was painting him out to be this hero, and it didn't sit well with me because of what he does. And also questioning that whole thing, which I suppose you could apply to all the other films as well, is why is he making these people do this, knowing that they're going through pain and killing themselves in some circumstances, most circumstances, when he's meant to be teaching them a lesson and being this kind of, on this moral high ground. It's like it just didn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to me.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head and kind of destroyed the whole architecture of the Saw films. Is that you're supposed to feel like he's been vindicated in doing all of this, but he's never confronted with someone being like making him justify what he's doing beyond some kind of like glib comeback of like, well, you were evil, so you deserve it. It's kind of like, it's not that simple. In the Saw franchise, you've killed like 37 people, so do you have any kind of moral argument internally about you killing 37 people? I guess he would probably say, well, I didn't kill them, they killed themselves because they did X, Y, and Z. It's like, will you put them in the situation where they had to kill themselves in order to escape a trap? So that's
they didn't really have much of a choice, did they? I think I pretty much said all I can on it. It felt quite empty, even though the gore and the violence was extreme. It still felt empty to me.
Most Saw films feel pretty empty.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, maybe that's what they're going for. I don't know. Like, it's not my favorite type of horror movie either, torture porn. So I give the entire film overall probably 2 stars. I would give the first half or the first third maybe 3 stars because I thought it was setting up something really different for the franchise and really quite interesting. So I liked that element of it. But when it turned back into a usual Saw film, I was kind of like, okay.
Yeah, same here. I'm going for 2 because I started off quite enjoying it. I quite like the stuff that wasn't the typical Saw style, which I suppose is, not really the sort of thing that most people wanting this film or the franchise would be after. So, I know that's part and parcel of it, isn't it? It's what makes a Saw film, all those games. But it's not something I particularly enjoy watching. And that's not just because I'm prudish about violence on screen. Obviously in real life that's a completely different ballgame. I hate it. Don't like violence, people being violent against other people. But yeah, as part of entertainment, I think as part of a good story and good acting, I think it plays an essential part of a horror film. You need it to a certain point, I think. But for this, I just, I didn't. Did I enjoy it? I enjoyed elements of it. I enjoyed watching where it was going. I did actually know where it was going. So 2 stars each.
I don't know what else to say about Saw X.
I know, yeah. I mean, I know people are saying it's one of the best of the franchise, but for me, as a standalone film, it's not enough. And I don't particularly want to go back and watch all the others.
I think you might have to see 3 through 9 now.
In my worst nightmare. So there we go. So you can download it. You can buy and rent it on digital. Right now it's called Saw X or Saw 10. I'm calling it Saw X. Let me know if you've seen it. Drop a comment down below. Matt, always good to see you. You've got a new album out. You are part of a synth rock duo. No, what do you call yourselves? Microfilm, obviously.
Sometimes synth pop, sometimes dabble in like techno, sometimes ambient, which is what the new album is, a lot of ambient kind of sounds. But yeah, synth pop for the most part, I'd say. And
the new album is a Halloween special, isn't it?
It is. It's out today. Well, today is Halloween. When you're seeing this after Halloween, but it's called Giallo Amore Mio, which is Italian for Giallo My Love, and Giallo is Italian slasher movies, pretty much. So it's a score to an imaginary 80s Italian horror movie. There's a couple songs with vocals on it, but it's mainly an instrumental score like you'd have for a film. Very dark, creepy, ambient, but kind of darkly beautiful, I'd say, in a way.
Yeah, it's really good. And I was going to say, if people are wanting that horror soundtrack for Halloween, I know obviously it's too late because this video will go out after Halloween, but for next year, buy it and you can play it next year.
Yeah, or you can play it any day of the year you want to.
Well, yeah, you can play it all year round. Some people like the spooky stuff all year.
Yeah, it's streaming everywhere. It's also, we have our homepage is basically microfilm.bandcamp.com, where you can buy it or stream it. But it's streaming everywhere in every service, so you can hear it
Who needs the Duran Duran Halloween album when you've got the Microfilm one?
Exactly. We're a companion piece to the Duran Duran one.
Yes. Yeah, all the information down below. Check out all the details there. Click on the link, go buy it, support Matt. And yes, good to see you, Matt, as always. And
you too.
I'll see you on the next one. Thank you for watching, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe.